Hi, I'm Stephanie Kuzy, the Member of Parliament for Calgary-Minipur and the Shadow Minister for the Treasury Board. And this is Out of Order, live from the House of Commons. This is the current affairs shows where me and my favorite female colleagues get to talk about current affairs, the things that you read about in the newspaper, the things that you see on social media. And I've got a great team here with me today. Beside me, I have Sandra Cobena, the Member of Parliament for Newmarket Aurora, and a member of the esteemed Finance Committee. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Sandra. We have Carol Anstey, who is not only the Member of Parliament for Longridge Mountains, but also the chair of the Atlantic Caucus. That's a big job. You certainly must be busy with that. And of course, my good friend Raquel Dancho, the Member of Parliament for Kildonan, St. Paul, and also the Shadow Minister for Industry. Thank you for joining us today. Let's get right into it, ladies. The first topic that we have today, Prime Minister Carney and his in-flight catering expenses. New data shows that his luxury in-flight catering costs was nearly $1 million over 14 trips. Can you believe that? I know when I go to Costco, I'm looking at every single thing I'm putting in my grocery cart. What do we think about that?
Well, in Newfoundland and Labrador, the number one constituency concern that I hear is cost of living. And so we know that this is contributing to that quite significantly. But it's also just this whole approach and attitude towards fiscal spending. I also just wanted to point out that his cabinet members also like to have these excessive costs. Recently, we found out that Minister Julie DeBrusen spent $1.1 million on an environment conference just on accommodations and the renting of a pavilion. So I think it's just a message, and it's also reckless spending on the part of the Liberals that is really out of touch with what Canadians are experiencing right now. That's my sense of it.
And what aggravates the issue too is that Carney's expenses are even higher than Trudeau's. And we were already alarmed at the time, if you remember, with
That's right.
Trudeau's expenses, and he is doubling that.
Yes.
And when you look at the expenses that he has had just on catering, it could feed a family of four for 55 years. Yeah. So it's very difficult to justify it, despite obviously all the Liberal members trying to justify the expenses, particularly at this moment in time, where we have an affordability crisis, where they are asking Canadian families to stretch every dollar, where some families are trying to budget. They are offering a rebate, a grocery rebate, because of the severity of the issue. And then we have a complete contrast with the Prime Minister overspending this much just on in-flight catering. It's very difficult to justify.
I know, Kyle Seaback made a good point in the House the other day that the government actually has to give Canadians money to buy groceries because of the economic situation that this government for 10 years has put us in. I know when I go to the grocery store, I feel the tension in the aisles from all of the customers there, the mothers that are trying to decide if they can buy something. I was just at the grocery store this weekend. There was a family in front of me that was buying a bunch of chicken because that's what was on sale this week at the grocery store. And really, it's just 10 years of terrible Liberal policy that has put families and Canadians in this position.
That's a really good point, and we hear this every day in question period. Of course, they talk about, whenever we ask about affordability, they talk about dental care, they talk about the grocery rebate, they talk about these childcare programs that they have, all of these programs, and yet they fail to recognize that the reason Canadian families need these transfers, need these payments, is because they've driven up taxation, they've driven up inflation with their insane spending, causing people to have less money at the end of the day for childcare, for dental payments, for groceries. So they fail to recognize, it's almost like a cognitive dissonance with Liberals, that they don't understand that their poor financial planning for the country, that their irresponsible spending, that their high tax policies have led to this need where Canadians are out of money at the end of the month and cannot do anything beyond the absolute necessary, and in fact now no longer can do the necessary bills. And that's why we see 2 million people at food banks and all the other social programs that Canadians are relying on now, that is a direct result of poor government policy and massive government spending. And so I think that that's what they miss. And then they also miss the fact that it's Canadian taxpayers' money that they're giving back to them. After it filters down through hundreds of layers of administrative bureaucracy that siphon a bunch of that taxes, that it's given back to them. It's like a pittance back to them that they take a boatload originally. And so I think that that's really what gets my blood boiling in question period, this just lack of understanding of what we're really talking about, and also the arrogance that they use when they're delivering their message, that after 10 years, Canadians need a grocery rebate just to buy their kids food. Like clearly something has gone very wrong here.
What they're saying? When
I don't
I
know.
struggle with that all the time.
Yeah, even on the topic of inflation, for instance, it really gets to me because, of course, they will stand up and say, well, if inflation is within the Bank of Canada's target rate, if you peel back the onion, you look at food inflation, and we're one of the worst in the G7. But not only that, do you go to the grocery store and pay inflation? No, you don't pay inflation, you pay prices. And after 10, 11 years of a liberal government where you've had inflation after inflation and then out of control inflation for several years, have you seen the prices come down? No, never, right? And so they're failing to recognize that. They're failing to recognize that the prices are what they are right now, because it's a direct result of their inflationary policies, even though they want to hide behind that technical term of, well, we are within the Bank of Canada's target rate. Well, no, right? Nobody goes to the store and says, you know what, it's okay, we're within that target rate. And you know what, the IMF says we're okay, so like it must be fine. It's not true.
And then I think, to your point, exactly, we've had this inflation every year exceeding the targets for a number of years since the pandemic and the massive injection of spending and debt spending that they did. But so when we say, if inflation is at 2% target, that doesn't mean that all of the other years of inflation tacked on each year, it doesn't mean it's going down.
No.
It just means, well, I guess prices are only going to increase 2% this year, which isn't actually really reflective of all the grocery price increases like red meat or whatever it might be. So I think that's the message that they're failing, that isn't being communicated by the news media either. They'll announce, inflation is within target. That doesn't mean that we've retracted the inflation from the last 10 years. It just means it's only going up a little bit less than normal now this year.
Absolutely. So, and the taxation as well, and the extra costs on every part of the supply chain, especially in areas that are more remote and rural in the country, is exasperating the food inflation issue. Some of the very unfortunate statistics, especially in my province, 25% of our children live in food insecure households. And what really, to your point of getting your blood boiling, I feel like there's this lack of seriousness around the issue on the government's part. And we consistently bring this up. I mean, you hear me talk about this all the time, and it's because of the heartbreaking stories that I hear in my riding. Seniors going to the grocery store and having to make impossible choices. I've actually had people come up to me in the grocery store upset because they've seen a senior standing in the aisles and trying to make these choices about how they're going to feed themselves for the rest of the week. And we have an aging demographic. And so I get so heated and upset because I just feel like they're not taking it seriously.
They're very dismissive, completely. We see that in their responses, I think all the way up from the Prime Minister all the way to the backbenches, that they all carry this air of dismissal. They don't take it seriously, as you said. Okay, we'll move on to our next topic now. Bill C-22, the bill on, privacy powers within the government. And I bring this bill forward because I think this is an excellent example of somewhere where our caucus sort of had two interesting competing positions. Those who really believe in the privacy of Canadians, that information should be kept private, that this is something that rests with individuals. As well, we have a very strong law and order caucus. We're very fortunate to have a lot of members who served in different types of forces, everything from the military to local police, even a retired firefighter. And so we kind of had different positions on this bill, but we're able to navigate what was an impossible position from the Liberals through our process to sort of come to largely a consensus within our group. But I also think, more importantly, our team was able to prosecute the government on the specific aspects of this bill to uncover really the liberal intentions of this bill, which we often find in a lot of cases are not sincere, what they're putting forward necessarily. And I think we're going to see this as well with the new online harms bill, C9, I believe, that has been announced. So I just bring Bill C-22 forward as just a really interesting case study of the effectiveness of our group and ability to come to some sort of consensus, but also recognizing the different positions within our caucus. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would say that I was somebody who was kind of conflicted on where I stood on this issue, because I do believe that we are the party of law and order, and I think we need to give police certainly the tools that they need in order to do their jobs effectively, especially when you're talking about online harms. Being a mom of 4, I felt like that was really important. But then on the other side, I do also believe that we need to have freedoms in place and that we shouldn't be allowing this government overreach, which I think has been consistent, especially of the Liberal government, that we've seen this extended overreach. And so listening to many caucus members who certainly, like our lawyers and people who have specialties as well as our retired police officers, I really felt like we landed in a really good space on this, because the answer is that we can do both, but the legislation has to be written properly. We have to take careful consideration, especially with the large technology companies that are operating in the space. So when you have somebody like Signal saying they'll pull out of Canada altogether if this legislation goes forward in the form that it's in, I mean, the government has to take that seriously, but it doesn't seem like they are. Their response to that is, oh, they don't understand the intention behind the legislation. But they operate in the space. They are the experts in this area. And so they have to be taking those concerns seriously. Unfortunately, it seems like they're going to push this through with the concerns in place. And I think that really gives us an indication that the privacy of Canadians is not of a great concern to them. And
I think they've shown that time and time again, very frankly.
Super concerning.
I think this really activates a longstanding debate in the country between civil liberties and the needs of national security to protect Canadians from terrorists and organized crime and international organized crime. And so this is a great example. We saw FIFA.
And you would know that, having been Shadow Minister for Public Safety for a long time.
Yeah, and the Vice Chair of the Public Safety Standing Committee, Public Safety and National Security Committee, we dealt with a lot of these issues. We heard from security experts just across the spectrum. And so it is a consistent debate, whether it's Harper C-51, the Anti-Terrorism Act in 2001 following 9/11, the creation of CSIS in the 1980s, the War Measures Act, then became the Emergencies Act. These are consistent, important push-pull debates. Yeah. What is true is that Canada is a laggard when it comes to intelligence sharing on the Five Eyes security alliance that we have. We are consistently criticized by international security experts that while we do support it, we do bring intelligence, not as much intelligence in some cases as our other allied countries. And that's why we see some struggles sometimes with, for example, there was a terrorist attack thwarted because of French intelligence informing Canadian and American security authorities, where there were terrorists that were traveling from Canada down to the U.S. They were planning to murder some of the Jews in Brooklyn, New York. That was thwarted not because of Canadian intelligence, but because of French intelligence. There were a number of Canadian-based terrorist attacks that were going to happen in Canada were thwarted because of FBI intelligence shared with the Canadian government. There was a school shooting in Manitoba thwarted because of FBI intelligence. So if Canada wants to be a real country that has sovereign control over our space, then we need to have an intelligence apparatus, and our national police force has to have the tools to prosecute terrorists, child sex traffickers, international money laundering infrastructure. And we are not effectively doing that today on our own. We rely a lot on others, although we have excellent people in these fields that are doing a great job. There is a need for a number of the powers in this bill. There's questions of oversight. Should the minister have as much discretionary power as the bill allows? I would say no. But there is a need for these things, I would argue very strongly in favor of. And the debate is an intense one. That happened with C-51 under Harper and all the other debates that have happened over the last 30, 40 years on intelligence. So again, I think, has the government communicated this well, the need for it? I would say absolutely not. They have one of the weakest public safety ministers I have ever seen. And it is a great shame, because the public safety and national security needs of the country are no joke. And they have a weak minister running CSIS, the RCMP, CBSA. This is a serious file. So that's a problem. In typical Liberal fashion, they have oversight and too much power given to the ministers in this bill. And also, there are wounds that remain, last thing I'll say, from when the Emergencies Act was invoked. The trust in a certain segment of this population for government, and reasonably so when you consider what happened during that time and the court rulings since then on the Measures Act being invoked, those were broken. And so without that trust, any government, new power, even if there's a need for it, will not be supported. And so the Liberals have absolutely failed to acknowledge that and failed to do the repair work to build confidence and make the case that we need this to thwart terrorism, child sex trafficking, money
That really
Such a
resonates
great
with me
point.
because I know when I was chargé d'affaires for Canada in El Salvador at the embassy there, often we got our intel from the Israeli embassy, which was in the same building. Sandra, would you say that citizens of Newmarket Aurora are more concerned about privacy or security?
I think it's a balancing act. And I agree entirely with Raquel. And this is the problem with them trying to push the bill through. Because they're not allowing for this important debate to happen. Because that's what Canadians are expecting, right? Constructive, in-depth dialogue and discussion on these huge issues that have some pros and they have some cons. And then with this bill, because they're trying to push it, there's obviously some of the elements that you laid out that are incredibly important. But then you've got, the Minister of Public Safety being able to make decisions behind closed doors. I don't think any Canadian would be okay with that. And I saw that in the Finance Committee with the sweeping powers that, again, there was a clause within there. The powers of a king
Powers of a
clause that I
king,
called it.
you found that out?
Yes, where they
revealed
wanted
it.
to give themselves, again, sweeping powers and the ability to make decisions behind closed doors. That is not good for our country. That is not a partisan issue. It's simply not good for the country. And so we've had big companies like Apple and Google saying, well, this bill may actually compromise some encryption abilities as well. And so this is important, and this should be part of the discussion. But because they're trying to push it, they're shutting down debate, and it's not good for Canada.
I think on the point of tech companies, whether it's Signal, Google, or Facebook, or whatever, I think it's important to hear their concerns. It's also important to take them into context that tech companies don't want any oversight. They don't want any laws governing them at all. That's why seniors in our ridings are being scammed by Gmail frauds that are getting through. That's why there are issues with child protection on Meta. Of course, Signal doesn't want, and not to say they don't make a good argument, but to say they don't want government oversight. They don't want added costs. They don't want anyone poking around in their business. And I understand where they're coming from, but they have to operate in a society that recognizes there's terrorism elements that communicate on Signal and want that encrypted communication. That Facebook has to understand that people are being child trafficked. There's targeting of the most vulnerable people, and that maybe our security apparatus and institutions need access to some of that information. So I take the criticisms from the tech companies with a bit of a grain of salt, recognizing the environment they would love to operate in as overlords over all of us with no oversight. Not to say they don't make valid concerns, but we have to understand them in the broader context. And the other thing I would say with the bill, there seems to be part one that seems okay, and then part two that seems to be quite triggering.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
But part two in particular is where the conversation of the metadata comes up, and that's really been triggering for people online. But I think what's important to recognize as well is, number one, that's not accessible without a warrant. Like, someone can't search your house without a warrant. Like, a judge approved, the case has been made, there's clearly criminal activity, we need a warrant to search. That would be similar of what's needed, the oversight that's needed to access this information, number one. These security agencies can't just get this for anybody for any reason. That's important, and that has always been the case and will remain the case. The second thing that I thought was interesting and important about this is, if you think about how would a a terrorist operation or a child sex trafficking ring operate, they would be messaging and calling each other. They would say, meet me here. So if you think about what kind of data would CSIS need or the RCMP need to track someone who's abducted a 14-year-old girl, and maybe they've abducted other children, well, you'd want to know who they're communicating with, where they have been. That's the kind of elements that this bill would authorize with a warrant and judicial oversight in that regard. I would say that that's very much needed and the type of information we rely on other nations to provide us. So, but again, when you have a poor communicator in the public safety minister and the Liberal government, when you have no trust built in, as they have broken out time and time again, now you have a situation where there's just a vacuum of information. And so it's unfortunate. There's clearly issues with the bill, but there's also a need for a lot of it that's in there.
And on that happy note, we'll go to our final topic, the Liberal recession, or is it a technical recession? Canada, the only country in the G7 and the G20 to be in a recession. What do you think?
Well, it's quite telling, I think, because we have seen the Liberals use this comparison to the G7 time and time and time again.
Right, that's true.
And now we have one that's it's a big one in that we are the only country in the G7 and the G20 to be in a recession. The last 3 out of the last 4 quarters, our economy has shrunk. And of course, these numbers are only confirming a story that we've been hearing from most of us that are door knocking and talking to people on the ground. They have been living this recession already.
That's true.
For
That's
3
true.
out of the last 4 quarters, right? And the numbers are lagging in that they're confirming what we've been talking about. And if you look at real GDP over the last 7 years and you annualize it, our economy has only grown 0.2%. And yes, there may be there are big issues happening around the world, right? And of course, the Liberals will point that out. But the reality is, when you do a comparative analysis with other G20 countries, and we are the only one in a recession, well, all the G20 countries also have international impacts. So then that confirms that, no, there is something happening domestically that is driving this recession.
What did you think of the Bank of Canada's decision last week regarding the interest rates? Do you think it was the right decision for this time?
I think they have a very difficult job.
They do.
I think they do. And I think that if you look at the commentary, even in the last rate announcement, they have a very difficult job because, of course, they see 2 main pressures. They see the U.S. and the upcoming negotiations of CUSMA, the trade tariff, tariffs and the impacts of that. But they also see, yes, of course, the war in Iran and what the impact that has had in fuel prices. And then, of course, you have to layer all the Liberal taxes on top of that and make it even worse. So I think it's very difficult. I think they're trying to hold on as long as possible.
Right.
But it is quite concerning because we are looking at insolvencies that are the highest since 2009, and that's right after the global financial crisis.
Right.
So any movement or upward movement on the interest rate will have a huge impact on Canadians.
Right.
I mean, we hear the stories that there are Canadians that are $200 away from not being able to meet their financial obligations. That is a big deal. True. So we are in a very difficult situation right now.
Yeah, and
well said, Sandra.
that point as well, like the lived experience of a recession, really. When you're in your community and you hear these things, also like entrepreneurs, like the entrepreneurial drought that they phrased our country in, where half as many more businesses are closing.
Because you are an entrepreneur.
Exactly.
And Raquel and I come from an entrepreneurial family.
Yes.
So
And that's really concerning. I mean, these are our people who are creating technology, innovation, driving consumer markets where, you cultivate more competition. Like overall, it's just a lagging economy. And for the entrepreneur, we're not giving them hope. And I mean, when more of them are telling their colleagues and peers, like, don't open a business right now. I mean, that's a sad story coming out from our country. And also on the insolvency piece, I mean, that is years of people drowning in not being able to make ends meet. And I mean, I think for any of us, we probably all know families in those situations. True. Those are not easy decisions for people. It's not an easy way out, because there's some big implications for insolvencies for people in terms of acquiring properties thereafter or making large financial decisions. So when you see Canadians,
real consequences.
Yeah. that is a really sad story that's coming from our country, and I think that's something, once again, when we talk about the frustrations of what happens when we're talking to our constituents, these are the stories that we've been hearing for a long time, and then you go sit in the House of Commons and it's like coming from the other side. It's this prime minister that was, promoted to do all of these wonderful things, yet the lived reality is Canadians are worse and worse off every month, every quarter. And now, like, the economic data is showing it, but it just seems like this narrative continues that, he's growing the country and making better. Us stronger, and that's really not the reality that we face in our communities every single day.
Isn't that the truth? I think for me, when we got the news about the recession, to me it was just really the clearest indicator that a decade of liberal economic promises with all their spending were broken. And it is clear that liberal economic management has failed. Yeah. Every single year for a decade, as they've run the most massive deficits in history, and they doubled the national debt under Trudeau, right? It took 150 years to get the debt we had. He doubled that during his 3 terms. And they made all these promises of all of the industrial control with all their big, multi-billion-dollar spending packages, whether it's in, green jobs or the auto sector, all the jobs that it was going to create. And yet we've had zero productivity growth in a decade. We've had higher taxation, record inflation, 2 million people out of food bank, and now a recession. So after 10 years, spending more money than any other government in history combined, we have a recession. So clearly the way that they approach the economy, massive government, massive taxation, massive spending, massive state control and intervention in the economy does not work to provide affordable lives for Canadians or prosperity and a productivity increase. And I think that's all the proof that I need to see. They can blame all the things in the world. There have been economic shocks before. There have been tanking oil prices before. And yet here we are after a decade of the most spending in history in a recession. So the way that they approach it doesn't work. And I think that's why we need a conservative majority government more than any other time in history.
I'm up for that, most definitely.
Let's do it.
Well, we will end now on a positive note. I'm going to go around the table, and I want to hear what your plans are for the summer. Raquel.
Well, I'm really looking forward to getting out in the community. Of course, it's barbecue season. We have community parades. We have lots of really active cultural events in Winnipeg, so I'm looking forward to that. But also I have a 2.5-year-old. We're going to be doing swimming lessons this year, her and I, and a lot of mommy and me activities. So we're really looking forward to that.
I love that. I'm going to be doing something similar. First half of July, I'm going to be busy with the Stampede. I hope to see you there. And then lots of time with my family. Carol, what will you be doing this summer?
Yeah, so we decided that we're going to take the family and travel around the riding. So the riding is 47,000 square kilometers. So it's quite large, but there's so many beautiful things to see in Long Range Mountains. So we're going to attend festivals and events and get out into all the nook and crannies, like we like to call it, and camp with the kids and really make it a family summer, but incorporate all the communities at the same time. So we're really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And Sandra, I have saved you for last. What are your plans for the summer?
Well, my summer, the first half of the summer, actually, it's going to be quite active. And I truly love the summer in Newmarket Aurora because it feels like the towns really do light up. There are concerts at the parks. There's, of course, the Canada Day celebrations and pancakes. And you just see like the volume of people coming out is obviously unlike any other time of the year. So I'm looking forward to that. But I do also have a baby girl coming later in the summer.
Yay!
And so we'll be, I suppose, closing out the summer with a precious baby girl joining our family.
That is wonderful news and a wonderful piece of news to end on. I'm Stephanie Kuzy, the Member of Parliament for Calgary-Minipur, the Shadow Minister for the Treasury Board, and I've been joined today by Sandra Cobena from Newmarket Aurora, Carol Anstey from Long Range Mountains. Raquel Dancho from Kildone and St. Paul, and this was Out of Order, live from Parliament Hill. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great summer, everybody.